It's the OVGA Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the OVGA Podcast. I'm Sanford. Today I'm joined by Dan, as usual, and a special guest host, Jeremy Buzash. Hey everybody.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
So we were kind of joking, Jeremy. This is kind of a time difference now, right? Like Dan and I are here sitting at 11 a.m. and it's what time is it for you?
Just after 20 after 9.
Yeah, in the morning. And let's be clear, Sanford, it's more like a lifestyle difference too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a working musician here who does like evening stuff most of the time, so it's like,
right,
I get to sleep in.
And for us, you know, we're kind of 9 to 5ers. We get up early and kind of get to bed earlier and so on. And so we were trying to find a time that would work. And I had commitments in the afternoon and I have to work after. And, you know, you were like, seriously, 9 a.m.?
It's like, oh, God. Just what I want to do on a Sunday.
Exactly. So we managed to find a balance in with this 11 a.m. / 9 a.m. start and a copious amount of coffee, I believe.
Oh, yeah. I am prepared.
Yeah.
So Jeremy's a familiar face, I think, to our small group, our contingent that's kind of tuning into the podcast and watching things. But, you know, Jeremy's been in the collecting community. He's done a number of other videos with other collectors, other channels and things, and started to really help spread the word a little bit, right? What is original video game art? And how do you get it? How did you get involved? What are these stories, right? So Jeremy should be a familiar face. So I want to bring him on a bit to talk certainly about his collection, but also, like as I said, as a kind of a bit of a guest host. We got a topic we'll go into, and we'll tee it up in a little bit. But Jeremy, I wanted to turn it over to you to introduce yourself for a moment.
Yeah. So I've been, I guess, pretty much a lifelong collector, kind of Pokemon card kid, you know, in the 90s. And that kind of turned into a love of vintage Spider-Man comics in high school. And then eventually that turned into video games. And in 2019, I was fortunate enough to get my first piece of art. And that was from Curtis, who's a good friend of Dan's. And I got Rap Jam from him. And that kind of like set me on the path as an art collector. I definitely remember getting it, you know, in the box and taking it out and just like, oh my God, this is the next level. I just knew, you know, I was going to be obsessed with this kind of thing.
That was almost exactly what happened with me when I got my first piece as well. Just first half a second was like, oh crap, I'm going to be selling everything.
So
I just looked at my games and I was like,
see ya.
Okay. Yeah.
So Jeremy, do you remember, because we talked about this on one of our previous episodes, of like from that first piece to your second one, like what was the time lag there for you?
You know, it was pretty quick. The second piece, I think, was the Imperium unused cover. That was my second piece, which I got from Jeremy S.
Yep.
And
okay.
I remember we worked out some kind of like partial trade, and I'd sold a bunch of games to kind of buy it, and it was not long after getting it that I kind of realized that I wouldn't be able to keep kind of acquiring art at this level, so I needed to kind of like put some work into it and look for stuff if I wanted to be able to build a collection.
Yeah, when you came on the scene, I don't really remember there being like any time gaps. Like you just kind of hit the ground running and went for it. That's what I recall. Like there was no break.
Yeah, it was pretty quick. I definitely remember, I think it was in August of 2019. I think Turok was kind of the first thing that I had found.
Right, okay. Yeah, that Game Boy cover, the Turok Game Boy cover.
Yeah,
very nice. And that's sort of, I guess, you know, with you having, and I started collecting comics when I was like 11, and I don't really collect, but like I have a few. And with you having that background as well, you know, that was kind of a logical entry point for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a world that you knew. I guess you figured out that some games were kind of done in that comic style, and it was easier for you to kind of find that material. Yeah,
I think I kind of looked at it as maybe an opportunity for some unexplored territory. It was like looking for comic related game stuff. So yeah, that ended up being the first thing. Yeah.
And I think everybody's kind of doing that, in different directions as we go here in the hobby, right? Because,
Hmm.
the mainstream, like big fancy title published box art pieces are just awfully hard to come by. And so everybody's trying to find their little unexplored niche of things to go into. And that kind of blends into today's topic a little bit too, right? This is a little bit of a niche in some ways for you. Like you've found some of this material, and I see we've got Deja Vu 2 behind us, which we'll
Yeah,
get into
right
and we'll
there.
talk about. That's an unreleased NES cover, and that's very nice. And then if I think I see kind of poking out of the side of your neck, is that Superman?
Superman Genesis right there.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah. I know the logo, right, from my own
Yeah,
background in
yeah.
comics.
And
That's
that
a
logo I actually
distinctive
had
shape.
commissioned. So
Oh, you
that's
did?
a
Okay.
so that's a new piece because the original, was like style guide or
Go
whatever.
with the original since it wasn't available. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. And I just want to thank you kind of on air too. I mean, I thanked you before, but on air for kind of, like Sanford said, spreading the good word, kind of spreading the gospel, being involved on, several shows, kind of educating people about art and game art. So that's it's been nice to have you, so involved and enthusiastic.
Yeah, thank you. I love to share it with people for sure.
It's been really fun just to watch it kind of grow as a community, right? And
Hmm.
Dan, you started the Facebook group, 2018 maybe, and I got invited to it. I was in it, but then I just realized, oh, what are all these 2018 posts I never saw before, right? Because I must have been in it, but not getting the notifications, not as active, whatever that was, and then seeing, right, new collectors like Jeremy come on, Steve Reed recently, Imran in the UK, and just other people that are learning about it, getting passionate, having a place to talk about it. And a lot of it is kind of exposure, right? And
Hmm.
so, Dan kind of mentioned a little bit with, pointing out the Deja Vu 2 in the background, Jeremy. But, I think one area of art that I think a lot of gamers probably don't have much exposure to is this unused art, unpublished art for unreleased games.
Hmm.
Because if you're just a gamer, you never saw that on the store, right? You never saw it on the shelves. You never maybe you got a magazine preview, but with like a lot of with a couple exceptions, some of these games or the artwork themselves is just completely new to people, right? And they've never really thought about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think the one subset of game collectors that might have some exposure to it is like the prototype collector, because some of these
Right.
games that didn't come out, there might have been an advance solicitation in a magazine or something, and so maybe they've seen a little image that goes with it, but it was never actually on the shelves. So the person that just collects retail games wouldn't have seen it. But it's kind of exciting in a way, because even though like the artwork may not be known, because it wasn't published, may not be as well known. It's also, when you kind of come across it for the first time, it's kind of exciting to see a brand new image on something that you kind of knew before but had never seen. That's
Right.
one of the things I like about it. Especially if it's well rendered. Like to me, with the unreleased stuff, the level of render kind of plays more of a role, because you have to have the art kind of stand on its own a little more too. So when it's really beautiful and it's unpublished, it's kind of fresh and exciting, and has its own charm.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you remember like how, so, Dan kind of teed it up a little bit, right? That whether it's kind of a niche you carved out to yourself, right? Or as the beginning, we all looking for our niches in this hobby. And, for me, right, the big stuff's gone, right? So for me, like, I was like, well, let me look at the deep cuts of the Sega Genesis library, because Dan and Adam never gave a shit about that, right? And there's a little signature hidden in the corner. And okay, I looked at it because no one else knows what this Sega game is. So I found it, right?
Right.
But like you teed up, you made a couple purchases from other collectors, you liked it and said, hey, okay, if I'm going to keep collecting, maybe I need to find something myself, right? And so as a result, right, you're probably deeper in the hobby, right? You have a deeper connection to it, you're interested, you're learning. But how did this unreleased, unused art, how did that fit into your journey as you're starting to learn and look for stuff?
And
Yeah.
Jeremy,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, sorry, before you answer, can I just point out the irony in Sanford talking about deep cuts of the Genesis library while he's got Battletoads behind him on the wall? Can we talk? Yeah, you really went deep there, Sanford. Real deep.
One day I'll share the deeper story, right? But I mean, it was looking at an underappreciated game that led me to discover, the artist for this piece and find the artwork, right? So it was the unturned stone, and because I was going so focused in a certain area that I came across something that then led to something bigger, right? But a bit of chance, a bit of luck, But over to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think it was pretty quickly after Turok that I had reached out to a comic artist, Val Semix. And it was just kind of a random, reach out. I didn't intend to find anything. And then he's like, oh yeah, I did the art for some Lobo game. I don't think it ever came out. And so I was really excited because Lobo, the SNES Genesis game, is kind of known as one of the most infamous unreleased titles because it received so much promotion back in the mid-90s, and then it was eventually just swiped from existence. So the artwork, the box artwork, I don't think anyone had ever seen it before because it had never been published anywhere.
Do you want me to load up the picture, Jeremy?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, actually, okay, let me see what I can do here. This should work. Did it pop up?
Yep, I see it.
Alrighty, we'll keep going. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah,
already.
So it's a really beautiful piece. It's inked by John Dell, and the pencils are by Val Semix, who was the regular Lobo penciler of the 90s, and he did some style guide artwork and stuff too. And actually, just recently, he found the original receipt for the commission, so it has Ocean of America on it. So it's kind of like the perfect provenance that me as a collector values.
I love how 90s it is. Like, even if I didn't know the date, even if I didn't know what game it was associated with or whatever, I'd take one look at that and I'd go early 90s. Because he's got that 10, like I just counted them while you were talking. He's got 10 wraps of chain around his forearm, like, total Popeye forearm. 10 wraps.
Yeah.
So you know the dating just from the way that everything's kind of extreme and the hair and everything. It almost reminds me of Samurai Showdown, actually, the way the hair is.
Yeah, a little bit, right?
Yeah, but it's very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that piece also came with an original logo piece of artwork. So I have that and the logo framed together. Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Now, I'm just looking back at the original, and I'm not too familiar with the title, but one thing I can't help but notice, Sanford, if you go back to the art for a second, one thing I can't help but notice is that it seems to be formatted for both vertical and horizontal, with the way. So was it intended to be Genesis and Super Nintendo?
Exactly, yeah. And from his prelims, which he sent me hard copies of, he left notes to the art director about cropping it for horizontal versus vertical layout for the different systems. Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah.
So I actually had a comic artist colorize that, so I made my own box mock-up for it too, and it's
neat.
Yeah.
You've done that a few times with quite an amount of skill. Like, you wouldn't really know from the images online that it was kind of commissioned for display purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's funny. I remember one. I'm sure you'll maybe share this one, or we'll pull it up on the screen, whichever. But one of the ones that you own, Jeremy, unused, is the Tetris 2 art for the NES.
Right.
And I still kind of remember. There it is, right in the wall. It's funny. So we were,
the clown. The clown's in the background.
Yeah, that's right there for you, Dad.
We've talked about that before. That's Kid Clown, and he looks very stabby.
Yeah. So he doesn't have his knife right now, but you never know.
So it's funny. We before I got the screen share up, we have our little windows on the podcast to see each other were vertical, so it's actually like kind of cropped, right? So Tetris was not in the picture, and then we get the screen share. You become widescreen, and ta-da, there it is. And I don't know what it'll look like in the post production. But with Tetris, you did a mock-up, and well, I'll pull up the painting itself, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think I have the mock-up. I might be able to pull it up in the background. But you took this image, and I remember once you made the mock-up and you shared it in the Facebook group, you know, Richard Lessie was one of the commenters, and another guy that had collected some original artwork, and because he saw your mock-up, he goes, "Oh, I don't see what's different." Right? Like, you've
Right.
done it so convincingly. He was like, "Oh, it looks the same to me." Right? Until
Yeah.
like you realize, oh no, you had put the logo over top, and
Yeah.
you know,
And that logo I actually had to make myself. I actually had to build it out of shapes in Photoshop.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was
One
a
of
lot of
your
work.
me-
That one was the most work.
so something like Lobo, right? You start with comic material, reaching out to comic artists. You have this discovery, and ultimately, like, Lobo's in kind of that bucket where the game was never released, right? Like, it never came out anywhere. Other prototypes for it?
Yes.
Okay, right. So it kind of like, it exists, but it never happened anywhere. Whereas Tetris 2 is kind of different, right? Because this is, Tetris 2 did come out for the NES, right? It did get a release, but not with this artwork.
Yes, correct.
Um,
Yeah, so this one basically it's done by Dave Hardo, who also did Uniracers and Dino City. A lot of Nintendo Power artwork he did. He worked for Workhouse back in the day. And I guess he was the original artist who was commissioned for Tetris 2. And there's actually a prelim with this painting too that has the Tetris 2 logo penciled on it. But for whatever reason, they decided to go a different direction and commission someone else to do a different piece of art.
Well, and that sort of speaks to the different buckets, right? Like, Sanford and I were kind of slicing and dicing. Okay, how did these unreleased pieces come about? And there's kind of a few different ways. Like, it could be for artistic reasons, like maybe, the render just wasn't that good. It might be for, and maybe, or maybe the image like is rendered well but doesn't really convey the concept of the game that well, and so maybe isn't appropriate for the cover, and they changed their mind. Maybe there's there's things like mergers and acquisitions that come into it, like with Renovation Studio Stanford that was bought out and led to art that was about to be released not being released. There's all these sort of business, or it could be a business reason, it could be artistic reason that kind of lends itself to that. And looking at it like this piece, like it's well rendered, I don't think that's the issue. I just wonder if it doesn't explain the game as well at a glance as what came later, right? Because if I know Tetris,
I had wondered about that too, and I think I remember the commercial for Tetris 2 having explosions in it, so I think it was kind of a feature where they were including some kind of bomb mechanic in the game.
Right?
But maybe this was too chaotic or something.
I think it goes too far, right? Like, it just makes you think, oh, this, all I'm going to be doing is blowing shit up in Tetris 2, because at the time, like, now we know Tetris 2 probably wasn't, well, I've actually never played it, but I imagine it's not really that different than Tetris 1. And this sort of shows you, okay, it's the familiar gameplay I know, but with explosions,
right?
Yeah. So, but amazing to get, one of the other, when we were kind of batting around what topic to go with today, one of the things that we were considering talking about is first party artwork. So like artwork for actual Nintendo titles. And, the message there was going to be, it's next to impossible to get anything. So to have something like this that is on a first party title related to like all world franchise is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a really nice piece of art, so I'm really happy to have it.
And I think kind of on the other side of that too, Dan, is like, you probably have some unreleased stuff that you currently own or you previously owned. Nothing exactly is coming to mind, right? Where if it were the published one, it would never leave your collection, right? Where you, Dan, would say, nope, hey, this is top tier title. I'm keeping it. You're not getting it out of my hands. Whereas,
I have
if
I have an
it's
example right here. I have an example. Well, I don't even know if I'd let the unpublished one go, but yeah, I can think of something like that I have right here.
pull it
So,
up. What do you got? Show me.
all right. So, as I'm talking about it, yeah, like I just, I don't see myself selling this in any way, shape, or form. But if it was the final image, I really wouldn't see myself selling it. And it's the unreleased version of Gunstar Heroes. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll pull it up on the main screen as well. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So this is Greg Winter's piece. The render, the detail is beautiful. It's a A+ Genesis title. And the published original does exist, but it's in the collection of someone whose favorite game in the world is Gunstar Heroes. So I don't think it's leaving anytime soon. But this, I call it unpublished, but it technically was published. Sanford, actually, you were kind enough to find for me that it was published on the Subterranea poster. Also in
Oh
Sega
yeah.
Visions, there is an advanced picture, but in the Subterranea poster. So the image did get some advanced publication and was the image that was associated with the title at first glance, but later on was replaced for whatever reason. And it's an interesting one. Like, if we ask ourselves, like, why would you replace this? Like, the render is good, it gets the game across, gets the game concept across. Like, the theme is, like, everything about it is right. But if we look at what replaced it, it was just a more cartoony style. So at some point in time, they must have decided, well, we want this to be friendlier to a younger audience or something. It just, nothing wrong with the art, in my opinion, but just decided to go with something that would kind of market better to a younger demographic or something. So, again, just a business reason that led to a piece being mostly unpublished, except as the advanced image.
And what's kind of on the business side of this here, right? Or execution, I don't know what you call it, right? So Greg Winters does this one that doesn't get used, gets a little advanced publication things, but ultimately doesn't get used. Then, for the final painting for the published one on the box art, on the box, that painting is known to exist. It's with a collector, but the artist is actually unknown for it. So in this case, Greg Winters does the unused image. Greg Winters then does the layouts that another unknown artist paints for the final box art. So kind of this, now they would go one direction to get a different style, right? Something more cartoon-like, a little younger maybe. But then they also say they want someone else to paint it stylistically, whether by choice or Greg is busy, whatever the circumstances might be. But there's all these little aspects to art, used or unused, this kind of the behind the scenes bit to it that you never really think about until you focus on the art itself, which I always find fascinating.
Absolutely. But as we're talking about that, I find myself wondering, like, have we ruled out the fact that, because Winters could do all kinds of different styles convincingly, like he did Little Samson, which is more of an animated, younger demographic kind of style. He could pull that off. After the episode, I'm gonna kind of bring up the image again and just ask myself, like, is there any chance that it's Winters? But the point is, we don't know. We can't corroborate it anyway. We haven't been able to find anything. So it's a bit of a mystery. And like you said, it's kind of a interesting little unresolved bit of game art, I don't know, knowledge or trivia or something that I'd love to find the answer to one day.
So it's funny as you say that. I think it's one of the things Greg Winters absolutely could have done that style, right? So I think if it probably wouldn't have been, we want a different artist style more than we want to change it, and then Greg was busy. is kind of my guess, because he could do that style, but I just don't think the execution's there. But hey, I'll look at it with fresh eyes too.
Jeremy, show us something.
Oh, well, so I think
show us something.
Yeah, so I think let's pull up Arcus, because that was kind of when I was first collecting, and that was the first unreleased game painting that I got.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a really cool website called SNEScentral.com, and it has really extensive information and listings on unreleased video games. So I remember browsing that, and this painting was actually published in EGM, I think, and in the Nintendo buying guide as the box art for Arcus
so it got
Odyssey.
advanced publication as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember when I was browsing that website, I saw the thumbnail, very blurry thumbnail of this art on the SNES box, and I was like, geez, that looks like, Julie or Boris, and I wonder. So I reached out to them, and Julie confirmed it was her work, and she still had the painting. So I had to get myself a Julie Bell Super Nintendo piece.
That's awesome. And yeah, it had to be a small thumbnail for her signature not to be readable, right? It's hers and Boris's are the easiest boxes to identify because those clear signatures right in the image. And the style and everything. But yeah, it's very nice. I remember at the time you bought it, I think it was around the most you'd ever paid for something at the time, right?
Yeah, it was pretty early on. I think it was late 2019, and
okay, your eyes went wide when you nodded your head there. You were like, "Yeah, it was."
Oh yeah. I remember like, oh, how am I going to pull this off?
So what's embarrassing is, you shipped this to me, Jeremy, and I never opened it. I had it in my house, and I opened the start of the box, and I looked in there, and they packed it so well that I was like, shit, I can't get this back together, right? And now, like, I kind of regret it, because I'm like, oh, I could have gotten to, like, really, gander and look at this thing in person. And so I think, I can't remember if you might have sent Turrican to my place as well and shipped up to Canada for you. So that one I opened, but I remember, like, Arcus Odyssey, I just looked at how well packed it was, and I was like, nope, not going to do it.
It's like, Pro Pack,
And was this a renovation title? Like we touched on renovation before. Is this one of those?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So renovation was, bought out by Sega, I believe, and they had a bunch of Super Nintendo games lined up to come out in 92, 93, something like that, and they canceled them all basically. So this art never went used for the Super Nintendo version of Arcus Odyssey.
And for the listener, that's basically because Sega buys the studio at that point. They're not going to create titles for a rival, right? They're not going to create titles for Nintendo. So anything renovation was going to make was for another console would have been canceled immediately, and there would have been Sega only going forward.
So, and on that, I mean, so it's funny. There was one, right? Because you had on that point going forward, right? So I think there was one renovation game for Super Nintendo, Doomsday Warrior, something like that. I tried to just search renovation SNES, and I got a bunch of like how to fix your Nintendo. So like, no, that's not what I needed in this moment.
No, that doesn't work.
Renovate your SNES. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So, so that one came out, and then so I think what it was. So Arcus Odyssey, right, did come out for the Super Famicom, right? But I think renovation was just the publisher, right? So the game had been made, it existed, but then was it Sega must purchase how does that work? Sega purchased the publishing rights, or I guess it just must have been just in that window, right? Where maybe they purchased the publishing rights for the US for the games that I don't know, it's a little blurry with developing and publishing.
I wonder if they actually acquired renovation themselves.
Okay. Yeah, that would make sense too.
That was my understanding. Yeah, that was my understanding. They just bought the studio itself.
Yeah.
But it's an awesome piece of art. Like the quality of the picture I have up here is okay, but I think I've seen a higher quality image that you've used or shared, or maybe when you made a mock-up box for this, right? So you probably used...
Yeah, even that image isn't super high quality. Like it could be better, but yeah.
But when I've seen the higher quality than what I have here, it's incredible. right? And it kind of gets back to Dan's comment earlier about like, hey, it's if unreleased or unused is going to move the needle, right, for him and probably for me as well. It's like I've got to be drawn in by the rendering and awesome image, and so if I get to do my own show and tell, I've got one here, and this is one like, well, I don't know how much I've shown it. It's a big piece, right? You're seeing the back of it, of course, I know, and so this orientation probably tells you it's going to be Sega CD, right? And so it's a huge piece, and I'm going to move it kind of forward to see some of the detail, and I'm kind of looking at my own thumbnail here, trying to guide it. And this is, oh man, like, you know, I had it kind of tucked away, and I pulled it out today to bring it out and talk about it. But it just looks so fucking cool, right? Now, the game itself, and I'll pop it up on the screen as well. The game itself is never released anywhere. It was supposed to be called Bug Blasters: The Exterminators, Sega CD game, and this is one of those on-rails shooters kind of games. But it was the FMV. How does that even stand? Full motion video, right? So Sega CD was trying to like shoot movies and videos and then turn them into the game. So
this was like a Night Trap type title.
Exactly, yeah. And so, you know, and I never heard of the game, but same thing. Like there exists. So I acquired the painting, and it came from an artist, Steve Lang, who did a lot of box art, and eventually I'm hoping to get out, you know, a list of his works, like Congo's Capers. I think that's the title for the Super Nintendo is his. He did Battletoads in Ragnarok's World for the Game Boy. Another one that I own, so I've got a variety of Battletoads things that come my way. And he did, you know, a lot of really cool art. And this is one, you know, he didn't know what it was. He said, hey, I think this is something for games. So then you go, how do you figure out what this is, right? So with Arcus Odyssey, with Gunstar Heroes, you guys talked a little about, got advanced publication somewhere. And so for this, I'm looking at it, I'm just Googling words like exterminators, right? Or something like that, Sega CD, and I'm putting these words together.
Ghostbuster for bugs.
Basically, yeah, essentially, right? Ghostbusters, Bugbusters, something, and and well, then you find one of these old videos, right, from CES or one of those trade shows, because the game got pretty far along, and just maybe they were realizing that those full motion video games weren't very successful, so they pulled the plug on it. You know, I don't know, cut your losses.
Yeah.
So you've got, you know, live actors in these very recognizable yellow suits with that very recognizable patch and logo like on their things. So they, you know, render this beautiful painting for it, and the game never comes out.
I mean, can you imagine what an atrocity that game must have been? I mean, the cover art is like dynamite. I can't imagine a cooler way to render, you know, exterminators. Like, have you ever seen like a bug zapping game that looks like 5% as cool as that? But you know, when I think about like a full motion video game of guys in yellow suits zapping bugs, like I can't imagine anything more hurting and less interesting. Something that I'd want to play less. I mean, it didn't even work with Night Trap, and that was babes in bikinis. If you can't make that work, this isn't gonna work. This is not gonna go anywhere. So they made the right choice, I think, in pulling the plug, but not before Lang did, you know, one hell of an awesome painting there.
Yeah, and I think like for a piece of art to be made for a game's development, usually it's pretty far along the process. So it makes me wonder too if there's like a prototype. Yeah.
So actually, the game just got released a couple of years ago. So I think the game was done, and then one of the it's official, unofficial, semi-official, you know, one of these not Pico Interactive, right, but one of those kinds of companies did a Sega CD release of this, and they used some. They did not have this awesome artwork, right? They did something else.
And let me guess, it sold like hotcakes.
I have no idea.
I'm guessing people didn't line up for it, right? Especially without this artwork. I mean, full motion like that would appeal to like the hardcore nerd and not much else, right?
Yeah,
like
you're
get
buying
a few
it.
sales to the hardcores. That's about it.
Yeah,
For
you're buying it for the
that's
history,
it, to
right?
laugh at.
And so,
well,
like,
and for the yucks, I think too, the lulls.
I don't know, right? Because Nintendo Age, it's such a big community that like anytime somebody put out an NES homebrew, they were like, "Holy fucking shit, we got to support it, we got to do it," right? Anything that got made, they do.
And Lobo had a homebrew too.
Right, and so, but now
that's
like
true. That's
10,
true. I'm
10 years
probably
later,
just going too deep on it because the idea, the fact that it even got made to me is ridiculous. Like, you're gonna have men in yellow suits running around, full motion video, zapping bugs. Like, what were you on when you came up with that concept? Because it's terrible. It's a 1 out of 10 concept.
Yeah, it's funny now. It makes you not quite. It makes me want to go back and watch the videos, but maybe I should spare myself. But the artwork is just awesome, right? And so this is one of the last unused, unreleased, paintings that I have. And, at different points I started to put a value on it, right? It's like, okay, if I was going to sell this, how much would I want? And probably where I landed was I'm going to value this more than it's worth to anybody else, right? Like, this is Sega CD. The game never came out. There's no nostalgia for anybody, right? There could be someone that picked up that re-release, 2-3 years ago, that new thing. They're not going to be pining for this thing, right? So my attachment is just, I love the image, right? And so I can kind of recognize that I'm going to value this more than it would be valued in an open auction, more than anyone else, would want to pick it up. But then again, I'm also just happy to keep it, right? Which is, now, Dan, with Gunstar Heroes, you're probably in a different situation, right? That if someone said, you, Dan, you would love to get the published one. And short of that, you're certainly not going to, release the second image, right? That one's not going to leave your collection. Maybe if the first one original came in, but likewise, like a lot of other people are going to value it highly, and so are you.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, everybody's. I think the analysis you went through is exactly right. Yeah, I mean, honestly, what are your thoughts, Jeremy? Because I just kind of agree with what Sanford said. I don't know if you have a different take.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends if it's like an alternate for a really famous title or just simply an unreleased game. For sure, that I think affects the perception of value. But I think the thing I always liked about unreleased artwork in general is that it just always has an interesting story,
That's true. Now, Jeremy, I love you. You're one of my favorite people in the group. You've done a lot for the hobby, but I have to take you to task a little bit because of this alternate word. We've got to put on the gloves and we've got to talk about alternate. Because I don't know. I'm being facetious, but I don't like the term, to be perfectly honest, because I think it's vague and doesn't really convey. At the end of the day, either something's unreleased or it's a variant, but I think alternate kind of is vague enough that it could be either. But I just don't think it's sort of accurate. Like, if something's unreleased, it's unreleased. If something's a variant, it's a variant. But I don't think an unreleased piece is an alternate. I don't think it's a word that ever sort of needs to be used. But that's my perspective. I'll open it up to you. Share us with your perspective. And, they say that negativity, sells clicks. So, let's sell some clicks.
Let's get controversial.
Yeah, let's get controversial. Exactly.
Yeah, I think probably unused is, the more accurate term for something like Turrican, which we have up right now.
Right.
And I don't remember where alternate came from. I think maybe Julie had mentioned that, so that's probably why the name stuck for me.
Gotcha. So that was how you were first exposed to Arcus Odyssey, was she had described it as an alternate.
Or Turrican, maybe.
Yeah. Or Turrican, yeah.
Or Turrican, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And to your point, Sanford, about the Boris and Julie's, I have a few in my collection, and they do look great in person. Like there's a warmth to them. I don't know if it's the skill of the artist or the medium being oil paint, or probably just both. But they do look. I mean, I guess that's true for so many of these things. They look so much better when you're staring at them in person than on the screen. The screen tells you a little bit, but in person, you just you really see it for what it is. And so that's a wonderful piece here, Jeremy.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on their website and staring at it for a long time, and I'm like, geez, that looks like Turkin.
Well,
And
it's funny because when we were talking about Arcus Odyssey, I was kind of saying that it was the most you'd spent, and that and your eyes went wide for a second involuntarily when you talked about the cost. And you said, yeah, but somehow I pulled it off. And I was gonna say, well, yeah, and you pulled it off more than once. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think it was really when the pandemic had started rolling. I was a professional orchestra player, and all orchestras had just shut down overnight. And so what I really had was time on my hands to research and hunt and find these things. And my parents had put in some investments for me when I was really young, and because of the pandemic and the stimulus, that they were like going really high. And so, I talked to my mom about it, and I was like, look, I'm finding like all these amazing things. I think this is probably, the time to invest this stuff in something else. And so she's like, yeah, okay, I trust you. So I ended up pulling out a mutual fund, and then I just used it to acquire a bunch of artwork that I had found.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Jeremy Buzash is a trust fund baby. Now we know.
It really wasn't much. I wish.
I'm kidding. But yeah, that's an interesting story. So we've talked a little bit about kind of unreleased art, what it is, the different reasons that it gets created, whether it's business reasons, artistic reasons, the board getting canceled, mergers, whatever. All of those things are kind of at play. And I guess the one thing we haven't really gone into that maybe we should is just, how do you value these things? Because being unpublished, you can't really use the published comps as directly, for value. So, what are you left with? You're left with kind of trying to piece together what you can in terms of what title is it associated to? How's the render look? Who's the artist? Like, for example, these Boris and Julie's that you showed, there's significant value there just from being Boris and Julie's and from being nice Boris and Julie's. Like, regardless of whether they were even had anything to do with the game, they'd be worth good money just because of that. And then the fact that, they're associated with good titles, that helps too. So, right away, you've got some good value there. And although this answer is kind of unsatisfying in a way, to me, I think you really have to take each situation very much on its own merits and consider, okay, what's the title? Who's the artist? How's the render look? How cool is this at the end of the day? How much do I want? How much do I want to own it as a buyer? How much am I loath to get rid of it as a seller? And all that sort of thing. I thought that a couple of that it might also be interesting to look at, when we're talking about values, look at what's happened in other hobbies. There was back in 2016, I believe, an unreleased version. They just went with a different concept in the end of Fantastic Four 52, the first appearance of Black Panther that sold on Heritage. Sanford, I don't know if you had the image. And I want to say it went for $150,000 if I remember. So this is Jack Kirby, prime period. And I don't know why exactly they went with a different image in the end. Looking at the costume, I wonder if they changed something about that. I should have taken a closer look before. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
think they changed the whole costume design.
yeah, there you go. So, you have this okay, so it's just all black in the
Yeah.
end. Okay. So, it's a key issue. It's everything you want. Prime period Marvel, Jack Kirby is the artist. Went for 150 grand. Now that's good money, but if it was the published Black Panther first appearance, it definitely would have gone for more. So how much would that have been? I don't know. This is back in 2016, so money still meant a little more. Would it have gone for double, triple, something like that? I think somewhere between 3 and 500,000. So that kind of gives us an idea of what's happening in another hobby. There's also an exquisite Spider-Man Ditko pinup that's coming up on Comic Link that Sanford will pull up the image for as well. That is on. Yeah, there we go. It's unpublished, but it's just everything you'd want in a Ditko Spider-Man. And while it's unpublished, this Ditko image was used as the basis for another artist rendering of like the 6-foot-tall Spider-Man poster that was in a lot of college dorm rooms in the 1960s. So, there's the poster that was in the dorm room, so to speak. So you can see they just kind of changed up the pose a little bit to fit with the dimensions of the poster. But, we'll see what that goes for. I think that's going to go for, $300,000-$400,000 and break the record in terms of a price for a unpublished, piece of comic art.
Yeah, which it's a pretty great piece,
No, it's everything you'd want. I mean, the only thing the only thing that's not there is it being published somewhere. And if it was, I think it'd be, double. So I think this is just another example where, you look at it on its own merits. If it was, not Ditko, not Prime Period, not everything you'd want in a Spider-Man, maybe it's only worth, 10% of what the published would be. But it's just so good that it being unpublished matters a little less, I think, because it's everything you'd want otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true.
It's funny because I was thinking through it as you were talking, Dan, because you did a good recap there, right? Okay, Ditko, period, everything you want in a Spider-Man. But this comic art in general being new to me, in some ways I wasn't following along, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, there's lots of other, if it's not published or if it doesn't have the usage behind it, what separates this Spider-Man from another Spider-Man, right? And now maybe this
great question. Do you want me to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, first of all, almost all of the Spider-Man covers don't exist. Okay, so you've got to get those kind of out of the way. There's a couple in Dave Mandel's collection. I think there's one or two others that exist, but for the most part, the covers are don't exist. When it comes to the interior pages in the book, almost all of them will be 6 or 9 panel pages, so with small images, right, to tell the story. And that's fine, but as art collectors, we tend to like the big
splashes,
the big money shots, right? And there aren't a lot of those. Now, a few published splashes have come onto the market and have started selling for, big money. I can't remember what the last ones went for. I want to say, like, do you remember, Jeremy, like 250, 350, something kind of in that range?
Yeah.
And so, this has got the big iconic standalone Spider-Man. It's not obscured with anything. It's just a, I don't know exactly how else to describe it other than there's nothing you'd change about it. It's got the nice kind of framing with the webs around the side. It is the basis for a well-known published image, which also helps, right? Even though it's not published, it's kind of linked to something that is published. But basically, the starting point is that the big money shot single page images like this are very, very scarce and expensive when they come up. And on the most part, there's only maybe one image like that in the entire book typically, and Ditko only did 38 issues, 39 if you count Amazing Fantasy 15, but that doesn't really have, well, I guess it does. So there's just very, very few of these, and not all of them are as nice as that.
So now, if we pull it back to games a little bit, right? Now, I think comic collecting and comic art collecting is bigger than where games are. We're seeing, a strong interest over the last couple of years in sealed games, so-called key titles, right? What's historically significant versus just pure rarity and print run and obscurity and some of those things. But the community of people that buy and collect this stuff is bigger, and it goes back longer, right? So this key period, I think you're saying,
long time, yeah,
here, mid 60s, right? So, but it's interesting as you start to compare that to video game art, there's so little of it, right? Like if you're talking, okay, there's scarcity in Spider-Man from this key period, from these big names, and covers didn't get retained. It might be some interiors. But it's fascinating when you look at something like video game art, you pretty much have the box art image, and that's it, right? There was no issues that came out every month. There were no, 20 pages of interiors, so if somebody wants, now Mega Man is kind of a funny example because there are so many Mega Man games. But even if you say, okay, there's 10, right? Somewhere, 10, 12 that have original paintings from the NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy. That's still a really small number. And then for those that own them, almost why would they ever part with it? Right. And so, I kind of get those factors, but yeah.
100%. Like, you have to dial back and remember like that the supply on this stuff is just orders of magnitude. It's orders and orders of magnitude scarcer than something like comic art in general, and that's both good and bad in some ways, right? Because it to some extent it limits the market, but on the other hand it just means that when you find something it's so special. But I'm glad you brought it back to games here when it comes to this image, because I was trying to think of what would be the games equivalent of something like this, and I find myself thinking of like a Mario cover that didn't get used. Like it would be something like that. And, I have something sort of like that in my collection. There's a Game Boy cover for a Game & Watch title that was created by a U.S. artist here. And like it's perfect. There's nothing you'd change about it. The published image is, as far as I can tell, like the same, but the story I was told, and I haven't even looked at the image really to verify, is that for whatever reason, must have been something politically inside the company or something, they had a Japanese artist repaint it. And so you've got Mario, you've got Yoshi, you've got Donkey Kong, Princess Peach, they're all on there, and yet it didn't get published, as far as I know. I think it's a story I was told. I presume it's true. I haven't verified. So like something along those lines. And I'm not trying to compare, my piece in particular, although I guess I just did. But just to say that, like, for in game terms, like for the pure gamers listening, like what is something like this, unused Spider-Man pinup? Well, it's like the unused version of something that's as good as it could basically get. Because this, if it's published, is, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, and certainly the actual covers that exist would be millions of dollars at this point.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, like for me, when I bought Arcus Odyssey, I'm like, this is everything you'd want in a Super Nintendo cover. I guess it is technically published, but just not on
On the
store shelves.
box. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I think,
yeah,
but
and so,
if we
go
go
ahead.
the other way on value, Dan, right? So this is
Yeah.
high value examples of unpublished work, right? But I think the other kind of thing, and kind of a built-in bias of mine, expectation is, overwhelmingly, I'm going to want the published images. But I think that also makes me willing to part with some of the unpublished images, some of the unreleased images. And sometimes this, value is twofold, right? Value of the seller, how much do they care about it? How much do they want to get rid of it? Value of the buyer, how much are they interested in it? And there's almost this kind of sweet spot where, yeah, if I have a Super Nintendo published box art, I don't have very many, I'm probably going to want to keep them. But if you're someone new entering the hobby and you're like, yeah, I'd like something Super Nintendo, and well, if the entry point for a lot of pieces might be, 10 grand, and someone doesn't want to pay that, well, then maybe the unused, unreleased images that you could still associate with Super Nintendo carries some significance there, right? This substitute, right? Where if you want to have something for Super Nintendo for original game art, and you're not quite ready to spend more, then maybe some of the unreleased, becomes an option.
Yeah, you're right. And I was just thinking about the other end of the kind of continuum when I finished talking, and so I'm glad you kind of picked up that thread. I mean, we talked about this in terms of a relatively high percentage of the, published image value, and a high overall number, but the opposite can be true too. I mean, if it's a title nobody's heard of and it's not rendered particularly well, maybe it doesn't really go for very much, or even that big a percentage of what the published might. So it is all just a continuum, and it is, as much as I said earlier, I think the answer is unsatisfying. I think you're just left with evaluating each piece on its merits and asking yourself how cool it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. I think about Tetris sometimes. It's like, well, what would a published Tetris cover go for?
Just, yeah. Like, name your price, right?
Yeah.
And they just aren't available. So, you have something that's as close as you can get, pretty much. Although I just remembered that technically there's a couple of published Tetris pieces out there, Sanford.
Some may exist, sure.
Yeah, possibly.
Who knows?
Who knows? Dun, 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 dun. Tune in for episode 9.
That's right. Tune in next time.
Exactly.
Right. But you know what? To your point, though, even if maybe something Tetris does exist somewhere in somebody's collections, let's say it's 2 pieces. Let's say it's 3, 5 pieces that are known to exist. Tetris, probably up until Wii Sports, was the greatest selling game of all time. And maybe it's still there, right? That, like, when you're counting all the home computer releases, Game Boy, console releases, it's available on Steam and repackaged in ports and all this stuff, that, like, however they do the math on sales, I mean, whether it's volume of units or dollar price, Tetris is up there top 3 if it's not still the top, right? So when you're looking at, okay, 3 to 5 published Tetris box art images, or whatever that number is, it's way too small for everybody knows Tetris. Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that, right?
It's so incredibly universal, right? Like, it's fun for young kids, it's fun for old people, it's fun for middle-aged people. It's there's no age at which Tetris kind of isn't fun. There's no nationality at which it isn't fun. There's no language that it isn't playable in. Like, it's truly universal.
Yeah, and we had like a kid in the news not long ago. Dylan and I talked about this on the podcast.
Right.
Was the first one to kill screen the game. So it's like all these old games are still in young people's minds when they're, when you think of a competitive edge, speed runners, these games have incredible legs.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Dylan, also known as Get the Greg.
Greg.
And yeah, well, you know what I mean. And the Weekend Rental Podcast, because I certainly have a lot of fun listening to you guys. You guys do a great job. And I think it's absolutely, one of the best gaming podcasts out, if not, the best. And, I'm glad you guys are there to kind of chip in every week and give us something to listen to. It's a lot of fun. I listen to you guys at work as soon as the episodes drop.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
And I will say,
of course. So if you're listening to us and you haven't listened to Weekend Rental, please fire it up. Available everywhere podcasts are available, I guess.
We'll drop a link.
We'll drop a link. There we go. Okay.
And but beyond that, I'd say part of the excitement of getting you on to join us today, Jeremy, is just as much to have you on and talk with you and talk about unreleased art. But we're excited to have you on, and again, part of other episodes, can we bring Greg in? What does that look like? And these opportunities to just talk together, because you guys, to Dan said, the topics you guys will start with. There was one that I shared with you, Jeremy, where it's like, what is the art equivalent of that topic, right? And if you run out of games to buy or they get too expensive, okay, where do you turn next? How do you keep your collecting? And my mind is going, oh yeah, there's all sorts of art analogs there, and how do you tell the story? And so just refreshing conversations that you guys are having on collecting as a whole, little subsets of it, and then as I put my art glasses on, right, it just get these ideas, and whether that's future things for our podcast, having you on as a guest, having you and Greg together, I don't know what that looks like, but anyway, just thank you for joining us today. We had a great time.
Absolutely, always a pleasure, you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Pleasure as always, and look forward to chatting again soon, I'm sure.
Sure. And for my final plug, because I forgot to do this at the beginning, right? You can find us on Facebook. We run a group, Original Video Game Art Collectors. Seek us out, join the community, have a conversation, or just be open to learning more about this material. We also run originalvideogameart.com. Awesome. Hey, thanks everyone. I'll see ya.
Thanks everybody. See you next time.